Okay. So let's start off. Can you state your name, please? Full name?
Ruth Hale Cobb Hill, but put um, Ruth Cobb Hill.
Cobb Hill.
Yeah, now in the book I put Ruth Hale Cobb Hill.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I did that is because of the Hale connection.
Right. Mm-hmm. And then when and where were you born?
I was born in Manila,
Mm-hmm.
Philippine General Hospital, July 1932.
Okay. And your parents?
My father was Wilburn Dowell Cobb from Cuyo, Palawan.
Where?
Cuyo, Cuyo. It's a dot in the map.
Mm-hmm.
Tiny island in Palawan.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother is Ingracia Hale,
Mm-hmm.
born in Imus, but our residence was really Manila, Santa Ana, Manila.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That house was in Santa Ana, Manila.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, and then your grandparents, the ones who built ESCO?
ESCO
Mm-hmm.
is Frank H. Hale.
Mm-hmm. Who
That's
came from where?
from Red Bluff, California.
Mm-hmm. And he arrived in the Philippines when?
1898.
Okay. And he was embedded with the U.S. soldiers who went to the Philippines?
He was a volunteer in McKinley's ship.
Ah.
He was in McKinley's ship that went to Hong Kong to meet with Aguinaldo in Hong Kong.
And then?
My grandfather became kind of the personal boot maker on the boat because everyone's shoes was beginning to fall apart, and so he was repairing everybody's boots, and so they went to. So my grandfather met Aguinaldo in Hong Kong.
Oh, my goodness. And you said that he learned his craft growing up
in
Red Bluff.
In Red Bluff, in the ranch, where he was the boot maker. He was a saddle maker, and he brought wheat to the markets in Sacramento to sell.
And then he volunteered with the
At the Presidio.
at the Presidio.
During the Spanish-American War.
And then he arrived in the Philippines
With McKinley.
With McKinley.
Mm-hmm.
So McKinley was on the ship with him. Oh, no.
Sorry. With
Pershing.
Pershing was over them, and Pershing, because of the shoes falling apart, General Pershing gave my grandfather a little hut in Fort McKinley to repair shoes for the military. And my grandfather said, I need more than this. I need to have leather from the local tanneries. So my grandfather was able to go and meet people all over Manila and outside Manila looking for leather and tanners who could work with him. So he got to know the chinela makers in Pasig and people who immediately were to supply him with stuff. And he told General Pershing that he needed for Filipinos to be able to come inside Fort McKinley.
Okay.
So they said yes to him. So he was the one who was instrumental in opening up Fort McKinley to Filipino businessmen who were coming in.
Oh, okay. So this was like 1900, 1899?
1899. Probably.
1899.
1899.
Wow, this was before the Philippine Scouts.
Oh yeah,
Uh-huh.
before.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And one romantic story was, I mean, he was a hard worker, and he got to know, the tanners, as I said. He already knew how to go outside Manila, and he built himself a bangka. And he, at the end of the day, he would ride his bangka down the rapids going to Laguna, going to Colomba. And there he saw this beautiful woman with an old lady washing clothes. And that was my grandmother. That was Theodora Elasigi from Colomba, Laguna.
What's the last name?
Elazegui.
Oh yeah, and didn't you say she was connected with the Rizal family?
Yeah.
Okay. So they got married.
Yeah, this was, I have to tell you the story, but you might not want to write it there. I don't know. And VM said he was going to write it up in one of his stories. My grandmother, when she was a little girl, the little kids in the town of Colomba used to go to the church where the nuns would teach them how to read and write. And my grandmother couldn't write very well, and she was always whipped with a bamboo cane. And her father, who was already involved with the Rizal people, got furious and took her out of school. Soon after that, the taxes were raised on all the people around Colomba and the neighboring areas. And the Guardia Civil were made to come in and collect the taxes. Well, the people began to revolt. And they were asked by the Spanish Guardia Civil to leave Colomba. So there was a big exodus from Colomba to Batangas.
To Batangas?
Because that's where the fighting was going, active fighting was going on between the Filipinos and Spain and the Guardia Civil. So my grandma's parents took her and her brother, baby, he was still a baby, and they walked on to Mount Makiling. Mount Makiling was where these people were all hiding. That's where, and they would have open skirmishes when the Spanish Guardia Civil would come. And that's where they were killed.
Who was killed?
My grandmother's parents.
Your oh. So she became an orphan.
She became an orphan. And she was 5 years old at that time. And she had a little brother who was nearly 2 years old, Maximo. And so the people were going hungry in the area because they couldn't plant, they couldn't bring food.
So who took care of her?
Well, the people who were fighting said, go back to Colomba. You have an auntie and an uncle there. They're not married. Just look for them and go to them and have them. You stay with them. That's your family. So she took her brother and they walked back to Colomba from Mount Makiling.
My goodness.
This little girl. And she said one night she saw this hut and it was empty, and so she and her brother slept there, and she said she saw her mother, and the mother put a blanket over her, and but she knew her mother was dead.
Yeah.
But so she vowed that she would take care of her brother. And then they walked all the way back and found her auntie and uncle in Calamba, in a little kind of like just a group of houses. And in that group of houses, that's where she was growing up. Never went to school, and they were hiding all the time whenever Guardia Civil would come and inspect the place. And there, an old woman told her, "You're going to marry a foreigner." And she said she was so scared because she was so young and there were no foreigners in their place. But she said that there was this old Chinese man who owned a Chinese local tienda. And she said, "No, I can't marry him." But she knew sometimes the Chinese had several wives, you know. And so she was very scared, very, very scared that that would happen. Well, one day, this man in the banca came by and she said, "Oh, that looks like a foreigner. And he has red hair, he's not Spaniard." So she said, she was wondering what foreigner this was. And then one day, she said, this Chinese man who owned the tienda came with this man. This man landed there, went to the tienda and asked the man, who was that woman with the old woman? And the tienda man introduced my grandpa to my grandmother's family. And pretty soon, I mean, they were in love and they wanted to get married. And my Lola, her auntie and uncle, went to the church, the local church, which they had not gone to since they since they were you know, told to leave the Calamba. And they said, "Well, you know, we want a marriage." And the Spanish priest said, "No, you cannot, because that's interracial. We do not allow that." So they got a carretela, and the four of them, my Lolo and my Lola, my grandmother and my grandfather, rode in a carretela and went all the way to Batangas, where there was a Filipino priest who married them. You know, they had their own. The Filipino, there were already a lot of Filipino priests in the Philippines by that time. And so that, and actually my grandmother, the one who was close to the results, her mother's side of the family, the Gomezes, were from Batangas. They were from Tanawan.
Okay.
So they already knew the area, and a lot of the people in that area from Calamba, Rizal,
Moved to
in
Batangas,
Batangas were already kind of underground revolutionaries
Right.
against Spain at that time.
That's why they tore up the cedula, right?
I don't know about
During
that.
the revolution, they tore up the cedula as a protest against the taxes that
The taxes,
Yes.
how many people lived in a house and how many you had to pay for.
Okay. And then so let's let's fast
So-
forward with your parents. So you were born in
I was born in Manila.
Manila, and then so how many siblings? So what order are you?
I'm
most?
second to the
Second.
first. I'm the first girl.
Okay, and
I
so
have
how
an
many
older
siblings?
brother, 7.
Oh,
And I had a
seven.
half brother
Okay.
who did not grow up with, who did not live with us, but he was lived with my auntie in San Juan, my father's side of the family.
That's the father of Chris.
No, that's
No,
different.
that's another one. That's another story.
Yeah, that's another story. This is on my father's side. My father had an affair.
Oh, okay.
Don't write that.
No, 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 I won't.
Leave it out of
Off the record. Off the record.
Yes. But it was just a weekend affair or something like that. Anyway, she had my half brother. Who I got we were close.
Oh, and then you were raised. You said you were raised by your grandparents,
By my grandparent, the Hales.
the Hales,
The Hales,
the bootmaker, right?
yeah, the ones who yeah, the shoemaker.
Yes.
Esco.
Esco, yes.
Yeah, Esco built that house.
Yeah.
That was built by a Japanese architect. And my grandfather brought him to Manila to do that. And I think he did a few others, but he really knew how to make houses where the winds could go in
Circulate.
one. Fantastic architect. But apparently when that was finished, I mean I was a baby then, my grandfather already said, I'm building this for the Japanese.
Oh,
Sarcastically.
right. Oh,
He brought this Japanese architect there, but he already said, I'm building this for the Japanese. Because there was already, stuff was already going on in Manchuria
right,
by the time I was born.
right, yeah. So why did your grandparents raise you? You're the only grandchild who was raised by your grandparents?
No, all of us were, but in their house, my brother Frankie and me, and then later Grace was also there. My mother and my aunt were the only children.
This one.
Yeah,
Yes.
my mother and my aunt were their only children of the Hales. And they were really catered to, given everything. So when my mother, they had a house built for them, bought them a car, they had everything. And apparently when my brother was born, the firstborn, they said, we'll let him grow up with my grandparents because the houses were close in the same compound. And that was kind of like a gift to my grandparents. So when my father's side of the family heard about it, they said, if they did that, we will take the second-born. And so straight from the hospital, I was given to the Hales with my brother, and that's how I grew up there. And
But your siblings were also in the compound, or?
oh yeah, Yeah.
But you grew up in the main house.
I grew up in the main house, and I grew up with my grandmother and my grandfather, kind of like they were my parents.
Together with your parents.
No, my parents lived in their house that was given to them in the same compound.
The same compound.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So they were not to be bothered by the children, but they were having one after another. They couldn't stop.
Yes.
So when you were growing up, so that was 1932. So maybe before the war. So did you hear, let's fast forward to the war, did you hear about what was happening in China? And I mean, from the conversation of, because you said that your grandfather,
Yes.
yeah, why don't you go?
Yes, we were connected economically with some of the wealthy Chinese families, like the Utivos, whose factories were and grounds were not too far from ours.
What did they manufacture?
Oh, they were into everything: department stores, hardwares.
Utivo, you said?
Utivo.
Okay.
There's I don't know how many
Are
left,
left, yeah.
anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But in that time, during that time, we knew a lot of Chinese. We had a lot of Chinese connections. And we had a friend, my grandfather used to give money to scholars. And
Filipino scholars.
yeah, yeah, Filipino. And this one, Anna, Sally Wong, was Chinese. And her father owned a grocery store in Paco that we frequented. Anyway, when Sally was born, my grandfather sent her to school, just out of friendship. And that family knew what was going on in China. And Sally, at one point, from what we gathered, became a spy when she was older than me. She was younger than my mother, but definitely older than me. But by that time, they were getting news because of their families in China. So we heard a lot about what was going on from a personal point of view. And of course the army, MacArthur already knew what was going on at that time, and kind of on the lookout. And so when Quezon invited him to counsel
a military advisor.
Military advisor, he accepted that. But by that time, rumors were already beginning to start, but subdued.
Right.
And then a lot of people, because of the Commonwealth being new, were excited about Philippine government.
Right.
And that's where the energy was going. They weren't going to outsiders. And Japan was an outsider. But I remember growing up, the economy from Japan, I mean, we were importing tons of material from Japan. The department stores were full of things from
Japanese
Japan.
goods.
Japanese stuff. And almost to the point where there was more Japanese stuff than Chinese. And my gosh, we were trading with China from the 16th century, I mean, there was nothing to that. It was just a very natural reciprocity. But during that time, Japanese goods were really coming in a lot. And so we were beginning to wonder what that was about. But as a child, I really didn't know, except that I loved seeing the Japanese toys and stuff that seemed to be new compared to American and European stuff. More colorful, more playful. And and then we had Japanese friends, you know, very upper class Japanese friends who were known in Manila circles. And they were talking like they were also scared about what was going on. And later on, we began to notice that there were Japanese, mostly the lower class ones, who the upper class ones would not
Associate with.
And then later, when the rumors, when Malaya, when Chiang Kai-shek was getting into trouble there, we started having spies. And, you know, it's not so hard.
Do you remember a photography studio, Sani? I forgot his last name. He was Japanese. And I think he turned out to be a major spy. But he had a photography studio in Manila. Sani something. I forgot. I'll dig it up. But it was a photography store in Manila before the war. And then it turned out to be he was a major spy in Manila.
Well, there were many new, young Japanese men without families who started showing up. And among them was our gardener.
Yes. Okay.
Our gardener was tall, slim, handsome, and he said he needed to have a job as a landscape. Well, he said he was a landscape architect or something. And we had big grounds, and we had men working on the grounds, but we needed somebody who could oversee.
And then after the war happened, he turned out to be an officer.
No, he came to us with the first bombing, Pearl Harbor, and he told us that he had a confession to make, and that he was a spy, and that he was very sorry because he loved us, and we all loved him, you know. And we just felt very sorry.
You remember his name?
If I don't have it in that book.
Okay, I'll look in the book.
Yeah, I can't remember.
I'll look in the book. And then, right before the war, did you experience the practice, the blackout practice?
It was right as soon as Pearl Harbor started.
Oh, not before.
Not before.
Okay.
When Pearl Harbor started, we were told immediately to build shelters and to mask our windows. And everything was blacked out because we didn't know if there were planes that would come. Because soon after Pearl Harbor, Nichols Field was bombed. We were bombed totally. There was absolutely not a single plane that could come out. And Santa Ana is not far from Nichols Field, so we could feel the bombing. We could the shaking of the grounds, and we built an air raid shelter right away, kind of just in a mango area. You know, enough for 12 to 15 people. Instead of using sandbags, we used leather scraps from the factory, So that was full of leather scraps.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandfather decided, no bomb's going to go through that.
Mm-hmm.
But we never used it
Mm-hmm.
because when the airplanes came, they would strafe our house and we couldn't get out from the back door to go to the air raid shelter because the bullets were coming
Mm-hmm.
that way.
Mm-hmm.
So never use that.
Mm-hmm.
We're afraid after a while we were afraid that there would be snakes in there or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Because
So-
we were right beside a river.
Oh, so when the Japanese came in after New Year of 42, were you
Uh-huh.
still at the house?
Yes.
Okay. Can you
I-
remember?
Oh yes. Oh yes. We were at the house, 1942. I think I have it in the first chapter of my book. I was fourth grade in what was called the Central School, which was the older kids used to call it the rat school, because it was an old Victorian house in front of the Casa Español,
Oh.
near the Hialeah. And that, we had the whole block from Taft Avenue all the way. Isaac Piral, the Red Cross, was in front of it. And, but that was only for first grade to fifth grade. And after fifth grade, we'd be transferred to Bordner School, which was a few blocks away, right in front of Philippine General Hospital. The building is still there. That was, I think it was burned, but they were able to redo that, and it became Arroyo High School right after the war. And now I think it's a technological college.
Okay. So you were in fourth grade.
I was in fourth grade.
So what happened?
And right after recess, we hear sirens. Well, we had never heard sirens before, except from ambulances, and these were not ambulance sirens. It was big, and all of a sudden there was commotion in the streets, cars and the carretelas and everyone moving around, and before you knew it, there were army trucks going by Taft Avenue. And one of them stopped right in front of our school, and an army man came down from the truck, came to our place, and he went to Mrs. Diver's class, straight to the class. Well, Mrs. Diver was his wife, one of our school teachers, teaching fifth grade, was right across my classroom. And he said, "We're at war." And he said, "I'll see you when I see you. We'll be back." And she was really but everyone was going through shock because the army trucks were beginning to go from McKinley
Bataan.
and to Pampanga, Clarksville,
Okay.
because that was bombed right away.
Right.
So
Clarksville,
that
yeah.
they were having to get their forces there.
Okay.
And so the trucks were passing by, going there. In the meantime, the principal declared emergency, call all the parents, get their kids out of here, and secure all the paperwork. And so they were busy doing that when my mother arrived, and she picked us up and other kids that she was going to take to their homes. Oh, but before that, she picked up my little brother and sister who were still in nursery school at the Cosmopolitan School, not far from Bordner, and also in front of PGH. And she picked them up from there. Cosmopolitan School was a private Protestant school. And when, I don't know what happened, when this happened, but the executive of that was a woman, was beheaded by the Japanese.
Later on.
Yeah, we just don't know how many weeks or...
Oh, not soon after.
Oh, that's soon after.
Wow.
As a matter of fact, there's a memorial there now.
So she was American. Wow. So maybe when it became open city, when the Japanese came in, that's when she was beheaded?
Yeah.
Wow.
She was taken away. She was taken away. Some neighbors remembered that. She was taken away and then she was beheaded.
Cosmopolitan School.
Cosmopolitan School. The old Cosmopolitan School.
Wow. Okay. And then, so did you hear about what was happening in Bataan or
In
what
Bataan,
was,
well, yes, because immediately we knew my two uncles were going to be at war.
So this was your mother's brothers?
My mother's cousins.
Oh, mother's cousin.
The baby that my grandmother took care of when they fled Mount Makiling, that brother, my Maximo was always taken care of by my grandmother. I mean, she was sure she was going to take care of Maximo. And Maximo worked at our factory, at the shoe factory. I don't know what he did there.
So he was recruited by the...
Maximo had sons.
Maximo's sons.
Maximo's sons, yes. One was with the... One became a joined the Philippine Army. But even before he joined the Philippine Army, a younger brother volunteered right after the Commonwealth was declared, volunteered with the Scouts. And the Philippine Scouts were part of the United States Army. And so he was sent here.
Oh, here?
Here.
What was his name?
Elasigi.
Oh!
Jose Piping Elasigi.
Wasn't he at West Point?
No, they trained in the Rockies.
In the Rockies. Okay. Elasigi.
Elasigi.
Okay. His name is familiar.
He never got married, but the older one, the one who joined Philippine Army, he got married and he had children.
So Jose was volunteered with the Philippine Scouts and was sent here to train as an officer.
No, he wasn't volunteer. He joined.
He joined, yes.
He joined and he wanted to be with the Scouts. So he came here. So he was an American citizen.
And then he went back to the Philippines before the war.
They were sent back there, and they were there only a short time when the war started. So he
was with the Philippine Scouts.
Philippine Scouts.
Oh, I'm gonna look him up.
Philippine Scouts, and he died in O'Donnell.
Oh, he died in.
And the older one, the one in the Philippine Army, died in Capas.
The older one.
The older one, the one who was in the Philippine Army, died in Capas.
Well, that's the same thing, isn't it?
No.
O'Donnell and Capas.
No. O'Donnell was where they brought the American citizens.
No, in Cabanatuan.
That's another one.
Yeah, that's another one.
That's another one. That's further up in Nueva Ecija.
But both died.
Both died.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, and these were your
And
mother's...
we knew they were both in the death.
Oh, that's your mother's or your grandmother's nephews.
Nephews.
Yes.
My mother's cousins.
Yes.
First cousins. and I knew them very well
Mm-hmm.
because we were close to that family.
Okay. Okay.
And they also lived in Santa Ana. They lived in a house near the Santa Ana racetracks.
Okay. Okay. And then so you heard about so they died there maybe
Oh,
May.
well, yes, well, we didn't know
You didn't know what happened to them.
what happened to them.
Right,
We just
until-
knew that they were called.
Yes.
And Piping said goodbye, came to our house, said goodbye,
Mm-hmm.
rushed. It was a rush thing. Poldo said goodbye. That was also a rush thing. And
What's the
and
name? Poldo? Leopoldo?
Leopoldo,
Who is that? The younger or the older?
the older one. He was
Oh,
the
right,
one with the
okay.
Philippine Army.
Okay. Leopoldo.
Leopoldo
Elasige.
Elasige.
Okay. Okay. The other one is Jose.
The other one was Jose. He was the one who trained here in the Rockies. He was here for a long time.
And then, so when did the Japanese take over your grandparents' house?
As soon as,
When they came into Manila
yeah,
after New Year of 42.
the day they declared open city,
Yes.
we,
December
that
20.
same day, the following
Six.
day, they came.
Oh, okay. Before New Year.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Oh. So it became like the headquarters?
No, not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. We were living there.
Oh, was there an officer who lived with you?
Yeah, but that was later. That was part of that whole scheme of
Oh.
watching us.
Right.
Because my grandfather wouldn't let go.
Right. So you're for the record for the video. So your grandfather refused to hand over his businesses because they were supposedly given to the Philippine government
Yes.
as
Yes.
properties of the Philippine. Oh, you can say it.
Preparing for Philippine independence, turnover to Philippines,
Mm-hmm.
to the Philippines.
Mm-hmm. So you were in house
Independence.
arrest.
Well, they didn't call it house arrest. They just came.
Yes. They just guarded you.
They just guarded us.
So your ins and outs were restricted, of course.
Well, it was more like a hide and go seek. We didn't know when they were going to appear, and so we'd rush to hide. I'd hide. We had very heavy damask draperies. That house was had wooden panelings.
So they didn't stay inside your house yet at that point, not yet.
No, we were still living there, but they were coming every day, every morning, in cars full of officers and guards, and our guards couldn't do a thing.
So when did you learn that Jose and Leopoldo died?
Well, we knew that they were in Bataan. The word was sent to us, and we just kept praying, contacting Maximo's family, and we were close. I mean, so just running messengers, and we were all just praying that we'd have some kind of a victory. We knew that Quezon left, and we knew that MacArthur was going to leave, and that they were already in Bataan, then Corregidor. And we were beginning to feel deserted because one day early on, before the Japanese arrived, just after the bombing, not after or during a hiatus in the bombing, we were told we got a letter, and it must have been from the consul, U.S. consul, that we to prepare because a boat was going to come and pick us up at our dock in Santa Ana. We had a dock.
Right.
We were right on the river, and they were going to pick us up. Just bring underwear and toothbrush, nothing else. And so I got my little school bag and put my underwear and my toothbrush, and we all waited at the dock. We waited and waited and waited. Nothing came. And at that point, we knew that if it did not arrive by sunset, they weren't going to come. And that we began to feel really abandoned. You know, nothing was going to come. We were on our own. And we were going to have to make do with what we had. And my grandfather said, well, we'll have to muster out. You know, MacArthur said, everyone's going to help each other. So these guys already knew. My grandfather was a Mason. He knew lots of connections.
Oh, he was a Mason.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, my grandfather was a high 33rd degree Mason.
And so, when did they? So at first, you and your family were still in the compound. When did they put your grandfather at Santo Tomas?
After they won the case.
Which was around what year?
Oh, just a couple of weeks or so, 2 or 3 weeks.
Oh.
Less than a month.
In 42.
In 42.
So was that before the fall of Bataan or after?
Before.
Before
the fall of Bataan.
So the whole time he was there until they were liberated, or did he die?
No, my grandfather was in the house for a few weeks. At that time, the Japanese officers would come and interrogate. We used to call it interrogation.
Right.
And he would state his case, and then the Japanese would leave.
Was he physically abused?
No, not then.
Not okay.
He was not. But the officers would come with their swords. None of them took anything out of the bayonets or guns, but their guards came with bayonets. And so they would stand around and my mother was very strong at that time, and I think at one point she said, tell those guards to get out of the house. And that was obeyed. And then one day, this tall, handsome Japanese mestizo came to our house and said, could we, I'm working for Colonel Seraki Butai.
What's the name?
Seraki Butai, Butai.
This is his name or the colonel?
The colonel's name. And he said, the colonel would like to rent one of your houses across the street from you. We had one that was vacant. And he, what could we say? Sure, he could stay there. As a matter of fact, my grandfather thought, well, if somebody's there, they wouldn't dare touch us. And this man said, I'm his secretary, I'm his cook, and I will cook the food every day. So we said, okay, you can cook Japanese food, and our cook will cook our food. So the two of them got to know each other in the kitchen. And so that was the beginning of Japanese food in our house. And we had a long formal table in the dining room, and my grandfather would sit on one end, and Colonel Seraki Butai would sit at the other end.
Wow.
And they did this for several weeks. And I would be in the
In the middle.
of the table.
Oh my
And
God.
I was the one who would help the interpreter interpret for both of them.
Oh, because you were already learning Nipongo.
No,
No?
this was way before Nippon.
Oh.
But I was, I was good at bringing things together.
Mm-hmm.
My grandfather didn't speak Tagalog.
Okay.
My grandmother didn't speak English.
Okay.
To each other, they spoke in Spanish. And so when I was born, I learned the three, and I would interpret for both when things got hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I became a natural interpreter
Mm-hmm.
from the very time. So when this happened, I put myself in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd sit in the middle. My grandpa was here, and
Mm-hmm.
Siraki Butai was here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they wouldn't talk.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody talked to each other.
Mm-hmm.
We'd all eat in silence.
Mm-hmm. So what happened to the dynamics when they put your grandfather at Santo Tomas?
Oh, that was later. We have to wait for that.
Ah.
That's the business.
Right.
This was part of the business arrangement.
Mm.
We think Siraki Butai was placed there to investigate us. He was at our house all the time.
Right.
So right after lunch, we'd go to the living room. And at that point, the Japanese already stopped. Telephones stopped.
Outside communication.
All outside communication. We could no longer hear the radio. That was all gone. And we didn't dare. We had no use to fight. My grandfather never believed in it. He felt that you had to fight yourself. You had to express yourself, and that was. He didn't believe in guns. So, of course, the Japanese inspected everything, looking for guns. Thank goodness they didn't go to my father's room in my mother's house in the same compound, because my father's guns were there. That's a different story. Then my father was a different kind of man from my father, my grandfather. So we'd go to the living room right after lunch, and I would play the piano. And Siraki Butai would sit here. We had a big living room, and he would sit on, but in the same area, close to the piano, because they were polite men. They were, and Siraki Butai was a gentleman. I mean, he really was very polite. And so he would listen to us. He would listen to me, and Grandpa would listen to me. And then I would finish my pieces, and Siraki Butai would come and say thank you to me and bow to me, and then say good afternoon to Grandpa, and the two would shake hands, and Siraki Butai would go back to his house, and with his interpreter, the cook, the chef. And we didn't know where that man came from either, because he was one of these men who just appeared in those days. And but he was very nice. We really liked him. And he was a good cook too, and that was the first time I smelled raw fish. And I couldn't take it, because we loved fish, but it had to be cooked, and it had to be very, very fresh. And anyway, so he would stop. And then they'd have later a kind of a repast in the evening, very light, and then go home. So when you think of the number of hours that man spent with us, mean, he was our guard. He was the one. He was watching us. He was, and we knew that. And during the time he was there, no Japanese officer or soldier came to our house. They knew. They knew. There were orders there. We could tell that. And so one day, when the case was getting close, and the Japanese decided that the military won, they could have escrow. Then Siraki Butai left, and he said goodbye to us. The day he said goodbye to us, after I played the piano, he sat down with me on my piano bench, and he showed me a picture of his family. And he had tears in his eyes. And I was just so, I just felt so terrible. You know, I felt like this was not a necessary war.
And then when was your grandfather taken away?
Soon after. After that, the report was made. The day after the report was made, 2 cars full of officers came.
Wow.
And told my grandfather that, no, they didn't tell him, they told my grandmother to prepare his things, that he could bring only so much.
So what was it like after he left?
Well,
Were you still protected or not?
By the Japanese? Oh, no more. By that time, it was a free-for-all. The Japanese started coming again, taking what they wanted. Looting, essentially. Stealing what they wanted. We didn't even know whether they were really ordered to come and see us or not. And by that time, our relatives from Kalambat were already saying, move with us, we're going to hide you here. And, you know, we started bundling up a lot of stuff, bringing them to different houses, different friends. My grandfather even asked, or we asked, not my grandfather, but my grandma and my mother and I went to the Imamuras who were just opening a big development in Quezon City.
Now, who were they?
Imamura.
So they were Japanese businessmen.
Businessmen. Who were into partially investing in opening up what became Quezon City.
Oh.
Quezon City was at that time just fields.
So they developed Quezon City?
There was a big plan.
So was this before the war?
This was before the war. There was already a big plan to open up that area of Quezon City, which was just hills and mountains, to develop them into private, kind of like gated communities. And the Imamuras were interested in that because they already had a house there. And there were the Arenetas were involved in that. And we were going to buy 2 pieces of property there because that was going to be developed.
So during the war, so they were still having the business then because they were Japanese, right? The Imamuras.
The Imamuras, yes, but there were rumors that they were going to be sent back to Japan. So the last time we saw them, I mean, when we came back one time to visit them. At that time, we no longer had telephones. We couldn't contact. But I remember us going there and finding them gone from their house.
So did you
Beautiful
go
house.
there straight from your house, or were you living in Calamba or somewhere else?
No, at that time we were still in the house, and now new Japanese soldiers were coming in, just taking what they wanted. And one day, the message came from an officer saying you have to leave the house.
Japanese officer.
Japanese officer saying you have, with his papers, saying you have to leave a house that even if you're Filipino, this, he addressed my grandmother, even if you're Filipino, you have no right to stay here.
And then where did you go?
And she said, well, this is mine also. And they said, no, you have to leave. So there was a deadline, I think maybe 2 days after that, they came and took away all our cars. And one after, they were roped one after another, including our old, we had an old vintage Packard that was used for shows, and the chauffeur was busy taking the parts out and all that. Well, by gosh, they put all the parts in a great big box, and they hauled this thing. And at that point we knew something else was going on. It was no longer safe.
So were you able to visit your grandfather in Santo Tomas?
No. What happened was, so they told us, you leave on Sunday. A few days after they took the cars, we were to leave. So we were mad rush. We had lots of people helping us take things away. Paintings and stuff were stored in different places. And the only things we were leaving were the things they sealed that belonged to my grandfather. Some of the things, not all of the things. Because my mother, I don't know, my mother became very bold at that point. And after a soldier would put a sticker on one piece of furniture, she would go and take it off and say to the officer, that is mine, not my father's. And sometimes I would just, my God, just wait for her to get hit or something. But it didn't happen. So she was able to save a lot of the things. Not to mention her house, nobody ever went there. But we were afraid that if she went there and I was isolated, something else would happen there. And
so how did you move?
so we had, oh, wait, big important thing. Big important thing happened. The massacre happened during that.
So you mean to say, wait a minute, so you moved in 45 during
No,
the massacre?
No.
So which massacre
The
was this?
massacre at Santa Ana at our place
Oh,
happened
okay.
in February.
Massacre in Santa Ana?
Yeah,
So when did this
I
happen?
have it in the book.
Oh, okay. I'll look at it in
Yeah.
the book.
I have it on chapter 3. And this was
So this was before the Battle of Manila.
Oh, way before.
Oh, okay.
And they already,
Goodness.
they were already doing tortures.
Yes. Zonas.
No zona yet.
No zona yet.
No. This was, the massacre started in Santa Ana. Okay, let me lead to that. Okay. Okay, here I was scared for her. We began to give things away and hide stuff in friend's house. I'll read this to you. One evening after the soldiers had left, I became aware that I was turning vigilant. I personally, as a little child, a feeling I didn't like. I worried about it as I thought it wasn't healthy. I was beginning to lose appetite for food. I ate dinner quickly, excused myself, and went upstairs to my room to be alone, quiet, and prepare for my evening bath. Climbing up the stairs felt good as I slid my hands on the heavy wooden banisters, listening to my siblings' voices fade as I became more solitary. My sister Grace followed me and asked me if she could bathe first, and I said she could. When she came out, I went in and took a long hot bath, calming down, getting ready for a good night's sleep. I came out the bathroom into my room in my pajamas, expecting Grace to be in her bed next to mine. The room was eerily quiet. Grace was not there. I walked into the partially opened stained glass doors that separated our bedroom from the library, wondering why it was opened and to see if she was out there. A shock went down my spine and I slid on my knees as quietly as I could under my four-poster bed. I felt stupid as I knew I was visible. My spontaneous response to the shock was to hide, but a four-poster bed offered no place to be invisible. My mother and my siblings were lined up against the library wall, looking scared and grim. A Japanese soldier was in front of them, holding his rifle and bayonet at them. I knew that if he had any idea that I was behind him in the bedroom, he would shoot or bayonet me. My time had come, I thought. In a split second, I said goodbye, looked up and said to whoever was up there, maybe God, who I never addressed this way before, I am with you now. At that moment, my mother lunged at the soldier, disarming him from his gun, which fell to the floor. He was caught by surprise. She told him to behave himself as she went back to the wall. He straightened up and obeyed her. At the same instant, soldiers came running down the stairs from the roof garden and floor above, in their cleated boots carrying guns and machine guns. The soldier in front of my mother and siblings ran down with them, and as he did, fell down the stairs, dragging his gun and bayonet. I ran to my mother and siblings, who were surprised to see me. We all laughed a freakish, nervous laughter as we shook ourselves from near-death experience. Immediately, machine guns began firing outside. People were screaming, and we could tell when their lives were cut off by bullets. We laid flat on the floor, wondering if there were any more soldiers in the house. My sibling whispered to me that soon after Grace left the bathroom, soldiers came into the house and ran up to the roof garden, where they started shooting at looters who were ransacking for medical supplies at the rattan factory next to us. Within the thick concrete bathroom, I did not hear a thing. My mother was made to line up the children against the wall in the library, and a guard took over to make sure they were not to stop their work of massacre. Soon it was silent. My brother Frankie crawled to the veranda door and opened it slightly. The killing was audible, as well as the sound of bodies being thrown into the river, Pasig River, behind our house. The soldiers then boarded trucks and left. We were all numb and speechless. Our guard, who was from India, beat on our door. We found him wounded, proceeded to nurse him, and called the town doctor, who walked from his house hiding himself behind fences and rock walls. The guard said, "I didn't see them coming. They were hiding behind the trees and bushes and attacked and tied me up." Clearly, this was not the work of just a few soldiers, but was ordered from a higher command. Rather than guard the place, they wanted to show the power they had. The next morning, our angry, camouflaged, handy men insisted on going into the factory grounds to survey what happened and found body parts, a body on reeds on the side of the Pasig River and one in the back of a building. A woman came to us insisting she be escorted around because she was sure her husband was there, and she found him. City officials arrived, were horrified, and said they would take it up with the Japanese military, but they didn't know where to report. The whole matter died down, leaving the whole of Santa Ana feeling scared and oppressed.
So what date was this one again in Santa Ana?
This building, my grandfather, when Malaya fell, my grandfather, upon MacArthur's request, emptied this, shut down this whole business. We had 6 buildings here that was used for making furniture. This is one of them. And way, way behind that was a dry kiln. And there were railroads coming from this area here where there was a landing, bring the rattan there to dry them up there. My grandfather had this emptied, and the American Army put medical supplies here. This was to be used for all this area.
Oh, that's why they looted the...
That's why it was looted by Filipino looters who felt that it should go to them instead of the Japanese. But we didn't know the Japanese. We didn't know that this was going to happen. And our guards was only guarding here because that was no longer ours. That the Japanese already took that. And so looters would come, and this is the roof garden. This was my room here. The library was here. And this was where my family was put up against the wall and guarded. And this is where they set up machine guns up here. The looters would come here, and apparently also from our garden. They came up our gates and went in there, and that's where they were killed. They were shot. And so we'd hear them tossing the bodies in the river.
The river. Okay.
We could hear it from where we were. And they dismembered. So we already knew that
How brutal.
how brutal it can be. And even our guard, who was from India, said he had never seen or heard anything like that before. As a matter of fact, he stopped. He said, "This is not safe. I can't work for an American because they'll do this to me." So right after that, put this here for a minute. Right after that, a few weeks after, maybe only 2 weeks after that, this whole place burned down. It was the biggest fire in this part. The biggest fire, because can you imagine? I mean, 6 buildings burned.
So was your house included in
No,
that?
I at that point, I started sleeping in the same room as my brother here.
So, but when it was burning, were you still there at that main house?
Yeah, I was there,
Oh.
and I could tell there was something going on. I woke up and saw flames outside our windows, which was here.
So who burned it now? The Japanese?
Nobody knew.
Oh, nobody. Knew.
Nobody ever knew.
Mhm.
The Japanese did not send any fire
Mhm.
equipment,
Mhm.
so this was handled by the Philippine,
Mhm.
the Santa Ana Fire Department and the Paco Fire Department came
Mhm.
and joined, and also joined by our men who came and used hoses and whatnot. But this burned, and we all left this building while this was burning.
Mhm. Mhm.
We all walked here,
Mhm.
2 fields here that we owned,
Mhm.
and put blankets down,
Mhm.
and that's where we all lied down watching
Mhm.
everything that was going on. The neighbors came and joined us
Mhm.
there.
Then when did you start walking to? Was it to Bulacan or when you
Oh,
started?
wait, that was already 1944, 1945.
Okay.
1944.
1944 when they
Yes.
started Zona. The Zona.
The Zona was towards the end of that.
Okay.
The Zona was district by district, depending on how many
Mhm. Mhm.
on the spies who would
Right.
say you know, do that street and do that street.
Mhm. So did you know of the families or people who collaborated with the Japanese when this was happening?
Here
Yeah.
we had one spy.
Mhm.
There was one Japanese spy,
Mhm.
Mr. Sano.
Sama.
Uh-huh.
How about Filipino?
We didn't know of any Filipinos who
Mhm.
as a matter of fact, Santa Ana had a number of Philippine Army people.
Ah, okay.
And so Santa Ana is an old district,
Mhm.
and they would help each other. I mean, everyone knew each other. Not far from here was where the Aguinaldos lived, where
Oh.
that was their Manila house. Was They were neighbors.
Mhm. Mhm.
No one in Santa Ana that we knew of turned traitor.
Mhm. Mhm.
But Mr. Sano led the Japanese to different houses to take them in away because he said they were working with the
Americans.
guerrillas
Oh, with the guerrillas.
or the underground,
Mhm.
and that they should be.
Mhm. So when you escaped, when you walked to Bulacan, who helped you with that one?
Oh, that was later on. So they took this after this burned.
Mhm. They took the house,
They
the
took
main
the house and we moved away.
Okay.
So we found a house in Pasay, right near the beach, Ochoa Street, and that was we were all cramped up. My auntie's family and us, so we were living, you know, bed after bed. And we were there for 1 year. That's where my sister contracted polio. When we were still here, something else happened right after the burn here, before they told us to leave. This part of this building was saved.
Oh,
This
it was
front
saved?
building. And the Japanese came and cleaned this up and built a huge hot tub
Oh,
here.
hot tub. Okay.
And these were soldiers from Bataan, Japanese
Soldiers from Bataan.
Came here.
So were they officers?
No,
No.
they were combat
Mhm.
people. So they would come here and bathe there, and this was where they were. And so at that point, my mother was really afraid for me because I was 9 years old. What might happen to me? Um, uh, all the women servants we had were delegated to different other families so that nothing would happen to them. And at this point, my mother and my grandmother decided I should be hidden, not just behind draperies, but out of the house. So that same day after they knew that these people here were coming from Bataan and there was blood and stuff that our guards told us, this is not a safe group. I mean, these were battle people. My mother put me in a carretela. They got a carretela from the town, and they put
Covered
me
you.
on the floor of the carretela with a sack of rice and a box of milk. And I was to go to Concordia College, where the campuses live, old friends, right beside Concordia College. So when here were these guys coming from battle, and I had to go out this way and pass them in the carretela, on the floor of the carretela, and I was really kind of scared. I hoped that they wouldn't
Stop the carretela.
stop the carretela, and they didn't. So we got out, and the carretela driver and I came out this street and all the way out to Concordia College.
How long did you stay there?
I stayed there for 2 weeks. But at that time when I was there, and they were always very, old friends, and